Everybody, welcome back to the Convo Couch. So, I wanted to talk about what's been the latest leftist slash anti-establishment gossip on whether Black Lives Matter protests are real, on whether they're helpful or not, on whether they're being co-opted by the establishment, and on how violent it is and the rioters. As somebody that's been pretty much to every single protest since it started, I have a lot to say on this because it is a very privileged point of view to go and attack protesters and say that this isn't a protest, that this is a looting, because it's a bunch of violent people that just want to destroy property, etc. So there's a lot of nuance to this discussion because, first of all, it is an American and patriotic right, if you're a constitutionalist, to protest. It is part of our First Amendment right to have freedom of speech. It is part of our rights to have peaceful assembly. It is part of our rights to actually engage in civil disobedience. Part of civil disobedience includes protesting peacefully, but it also includes looting. It includes that type of, not necessarily violent. It is violent only when the poor people and the working class do it, when the oppressed do it. When the government does it, it's the law. And we have to stop ourselves from falling into that mainstream media trap of, oh my God, these protesters are violent. Number one, when I was covered a protest where there was a car that drove through protesters, the helicopter shot showed one angle, right? And we got a lot of crap because people were like, oh, well, he jumped on the car. There was a lot of people that were trying to stop the police from continuing because they were stopping traffic, and normally all cars stop. The guy continued to move through people, and then somebody else went around and jumped on the car and pretty much tried to stop it that way, and then they fell, and the car continued driving off. In fact, they sped up, and the police officer, of course, just went off, and the whole time, the helicopter Karens, which I call everybody who decided that point of view was more worthwhile than our point of view on the ground, were wrong because they only showed exactly the people around the car first. They didn't show the 2.5 hours of peaceful protests before that. My issue with that is mainstream media is only showing one entity. They're only showing the perspective of people being on cars. They're not showing what happened to lead to that, which is a car driving through. Again, it's played over and over again when the mainstream media is showing what happened in West Hollywood where people were looting, but they're not showing the protesters trying to stop looters. They're also not showing the protesters who were primarily extremely peaceful, carrying signs, kneeling, saying, please don't shoot, and then getting shot out with rubber bullets, getting shot out in the chest, getting shot in the eye. A woman literally lost her eye because she was shot in the face. The police shot through the windows of journalist Tina Desiree Berg. They gassed her. Not to mention the fact that the same day myself and Johnny were both arrested in a very unfair, brutal way by the police, who didn't care that we were press and didn't take us into consideration. And we were just there covering everything, and they kettled everybody and they arrested us. The way it was done was completely deceptive. They told people to go in one direction, and when the people went in that direction, more police met them on the other side, and they were asking, where do we go? Where do we go? It was like animals to slaughter, and that's something that shouldn't be done. That's the whole issue with police brutality. I have never been fond of police. I have always felt like they've been unfair to the majority of people, especially poor people and people of color. And, I've had a lot of friends who in Florida had a record for drug dealing when it was just paraphernalia, when it was just a bong. I mean, it's these sort of things that have led me to be very much against the systemic oppression of police. And so when I see people who are primarily white, or primarily, if not white, very well off, wealthy, and don't really have to worry about money, go on their shows whether it's Sager from Rising, or whether it's, you know, other YouTubers, or whether it's somebody on Twitter saying we don't, you know, need to abolish the police. Even watching people like Peter LaBelle on RT say these things, like, it's like, what, like, where are you? Have you been to these protests? Have you actually gone on the ground and seen what's going on so you can have your opinion? Or are you just basing this on what the mainstream media is doing? I mean, especially these people who are so critical of mainstream media. Why all of a sudden are you believing in what they're showing you? There is manipulation. Even if it's a shot from a helicopter, you're only showing those moments more and more. You're not showing all the moments of unity and peace. You're not showing all the moments where people are coming together of all races and marching alongside each other. You're not showing all of that, right? And so I think it is extremely unnerving to me to see the privilege of these people sound off when they haven't even been on the ground. And you know, there are people that can't be on the ground because they have people that are sick or immunodeficient, and the coronavirus is still going on, and there are people that have PTSD, and I completely understand and stand with them. But even these people I haven't seen say, oh yeah, like the violence, it's all the protesters and blah blah blah. There is not evidence supporting that. There's actual more evidence supporting that the violence is by outsiders who we don't know who they are, primarily police officers who have gone undercover, and I have seen it. And I've also seen multiple videos of that. And white supremacists posing as leftists who are, you know, really going there to stir up trouble between white people and black people, because that's how we lose. The more trouble we have between our races, we can't focus on the oppressor, which is the oligarchs. And it's really, to me, it's like, why can't we just literally take our asses down to the protest and stand in front of a freaking cop and stand in front of him, look at him in the eye, and if they don't shoot you, okay, consider yourself lucky, because many people have done that and they are paying the price in the hospital right now. I don't know why. Also, why are we all of a sudden caring about Walmart being looted? Walmart, Amazon, Target, these big corporations. Hello, did you just forget we had the second largest transfer of wealth in this country, and like from the poor people to the Wall Street banks, the 1%, and we got a $1,200 payment in the last 4 months? Are you fucking kidding me? Why aren't we talking about like that looting? We need to talk about that, because a lot of Americans don't realize that this is their right. And I'm sorry, I'm not upset. I'm actually glad to see corporations get looted. Let people show the world that the unrest that is happening right now is happening because people have been oppressed for far too long. Their voices haven't been heard for far too long. This is bigger than Black Lives Matter. That's what people don't get. This is bigger than police brutality. These are the systems of oppression that the police are a tool of that enable all of this to happen. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't have health care. They refuse to give us health care. They refuse to give us another $1,200 payment even. They refuse to give us UBI. They refuse to have fair and free elections. We have literally Joe Biden, who can't even remember what day it is. Joe Biden, who has an abysmal record when it comes to criminal justice. He literally wrote the crime bill. We have Joe Biden, who is accused by 9 women for sexual assault. And then we have, of course, Donald Trump, same, accused by women of sexual assault. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. I mean, you know, completely making it okay for police to possibly shoot protesters, who has completely been not helpful when it comes to the coronavirus, who has all of these like views that he uses to manipulate his base. I mean, I don't think he's even believes in half the stuff he says. I just think he's a businessman. So these are 2 choices, right? Wrong, America. They're not. These are the 2 major choices of the party. But we have the choice to go and protest. And a lot of us have been talking about a general strike. And when I see people criticizing this movement, I think Aldous Reed wrote an article kind of saying this is just BS. Like, this is just putting the neoliberal agenda. I disagree with that. I agree that this movement is they're attempting to co-opt it. I see Warren supporters, Hillary supporters, all these people who are Democrats really, saying BLM because it's cool and because they want to be a part of it. Sure, that's going to happen anyway. There's nothing you can do to stop it. We see Obama getting on there trying to co-opt the movement. The thing is, we see it. And as leftists, we see it. As anti-establishment people, we see it. And we should speak out against it. We need to say something against it. And in order for us to do that, we also have to be aware that this is a good thing. It is a good thing that people are becoming aware of police brutality. Why? Because before, they might have thought the police were a few bad apples. Now we're seeing more and more people see. They've never been to a protest. They go to a protest and they experience police brutality. That changes you. It changed a lot of white people I know. It changed a lot of people who trusted in the police that I know. That is a very valuable thing, believe it or not. It's also valuable that we get thousands of people into the streets because guess what? The oligarchy thought we weren't going to do that. America doesn't do that. Now, my issue is that we need to take this to the next level. We need to take it further to the next step where we combine police brutality as one of our 5 demands, right? Where we demand Medicare for all, free and fair elections, no more endless war, like take our troops home, a UBI, and a criminal justice reform, the end to police brutality. If we can combine a lot of these things that a lot of people who may not agree on everything are for, then we take this movement to an actual revolution. Because right now, it's very chaotic and very disorganized. In a way, that's good. In a way, it's bad. It's good because if there's no centralized leader, it's harder to co-opt. It's bad because if there's no centralized leader, then it's all over the place and you don't know where to go. So it's kind of a conundrum. But I think if we make associations with people from the general strike movement, with people who are anti-war movement, with people who want criminal justice reform, which is part of the police brutality and BLM, and if we make an association with people who want to demand a policy change in UBI and who, because of the coronavirus, we're not being taken care of, we're gonna I think make some headway. And I think that's the next step. We just have to arm ourselves and be open to that and listen and do a lot of listening. You can't just push your agenda onto somebody without understanding and acknowledging their plight. And so I don't think this is a negative thing. I think this is good. Is it getting co-opted? Absolutely. Obama and the establishment are going to co-opt this. They're trying to. I'm sure there are people in there who have already decided that, yes, we're going to turn this around. We're going to stop this. We're going to quell it with positive imagery. This is one of the reasons why I'm not so crazy about the police just kneeling. I think it's good if it's genuine. A lot of the times there's a camera in front and it's not. A lot of the times you're beautifying something that is brutal because it's so much easier to deal with than it is to deal with the reality that this is still happening, that right after that kneeling, a lot of these protesters are getting arrested, mazed, hit with batons, and all of these things are happening. And so for me, we need to talk about defunding the police. A lot of people have said, oh, you can't abolish the police. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about defunding the police, meaning we strip their funds from policing in a brutal way, demilitarize them. They shouldn't have those weapons that they have. A lot of the accidents that they call or murders happen because they are overly militarized. They have weapons that they shouldn't be having. They are also held to a higher standard than everybody else. That shouldn't be the case. They also are given a lot more money than the rest of like social programs and education programs. That's one of the main things that Black Lives Matter here. One of the leaders, being Melina Abdullah, was talking about a people's fund, the people's budget, to make sure that the people are getting what they need and not just the police, in order to increase incarceration, increase police brutality, increase in just surveillance that we don't really need. I think we need a sort of community policing. We definitely do not need what we have now. If you go to other countries, their police aren't armed like us. They're just not. There's no need for that. And so again, going back to defund the police, absolutely. The police is right now receiving orders from the systems of oppression that crush all of us. And it goes beyond Black Lives Matter. They crush poor people. A lot of poor people tend to be people of color, yes. But in general, poor people are the ones that are incarcerated. Poor white people, poor Black people, poor brown people, poor all kinds of poor people. And here you can see it in the homeless population, where they get citations for sleeping in their car. They get citations for sleeping somewhere else. They get their tents taken down. It's abuse that the police get away with, and they haven't been held accountable at all. So when we start seeing some accountability, that's when things are you're going to see people be okay. But that's just one facet of it. It's one facet of criminal justice reform. We're still having marijuana be a federally illegal drug, which should entirely change 100% right away. We're still putting Black people behind bars for drug selling, when we started the war on drugs as a mechanism to fund our illegal regime change wars in Central and Latin America. It's all our doing. We gave these drug cartels guns, and yet we turn around and incarcerate the little people, the kids that grew up in these neighborhoods. We perpetuate the cycle. It's all part of the capitalist oligarchy. It's all part of that system. So we have to realize that and get to it. And we won't realize that until more people get out of their asses and go to these protests and see the truth, instead of what's being portrayed by mainstream media. We had the largest protest I've ever seen in LA, and it was massive. Thousands of people. I couldn't even go live or share anything live. The cell signal was jammed. The mainstream media gets not to be arrested, right? They're less likely to be arrested. Believe me, they're arresting all kinds of people right now. And that's a whole other thing. Our civil liberties, our freedom of the press, our freedom of speech, those rights are being infringed upon us entirely. In the past few months, they passed legislation to look at your browser history. They passed legislation to have more surveillance on the American people. And so I just don't see how putting all of this out there and seeing how we're not as free as we think in America is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. And I think we need to take this further. If it were up to me, as the lefty that I am, we would be going after Capitol buildings. We would be going after government buildings. We would be protesting outside of those buildings. We would be demanding that our electeds show up. We would go to every single elected's house. That's what I want to see now, because they are the ones, the gatekeepers that hold the power. And so this whole rationale that this is just a co-opted movement by Soros. First of all, Soros gave some money to the Black Lives Matter movement for a few years ago. It was the national Black Lives Matter. Soros gives a lot of money to a lot of charities. Soros is somebody I don't trust. But of course, just automatically saying this is Soros, please get out to a protest and see that George Soros is not funding these people. They're not funding the people with signs. They're not funding the protesters. These are just new people, mainly very young kids, teenagers to people in their early 20s is a lot of what I'm seeing, which gives me hope, because I'm like, okay, at least these people are aware that this is something. They may not be aware of all the underlying political maneuvers and mechanisms, but they're aware this is something that's unfair and unjust. And then we can have the conversation with them and be like, okay, so yeah, this is just one facet of it. Let me talk to you more about what's actually going on and how, the systemic oppression is keeping all of us under and fighting amongst each other for resources, when the resources are being completely hoarded by the 1%. And that's how you get to that point. You don't get to that point automatically by expecting everybody to know what we know. You don't get to that point by expecting everybody to know and realize that we are controlled by an oligarchy. This is no longer, a republic. It's definitely not a democracy. We don't have fair and free elections. People are realizing that on their own right now. They're totally realizing that without us even saying much. And so you have to let the process happen. But at the same time, we have to plan the next steps on taking it to the next level, which is where we want to go. A people's movement, a general strike movement. I have been talking about it completely nonstop for the last few months since coronavirus hit, because right now we have riots, we have protests, we have economic instability, we have a pandemic, we have distrust in the government is at an all-time high. This is a time for revolution, for a real revolution. And a lot of people are always talking about peace, and Martin Luther King was peaceful and he didn't. No, you killed him. You killed him, dude. You're like, the America killed Martin Luther King when he started talking about socialism, when he started talking about against capitalism, when he started talking about everybody of every color coming together and taking down the people in power. Because it wasn't just about his I have a dream speech. It was about the fact that he understood who the real enemy was. And so if we are able to do that, if we can do that, believe me, and we can have more leaders, because a whole other thing is like, well, we need a leader. Yeah. Stop relying on one person and one person to save you and one hero. We have to be the leaders we've been waiting for. And so if we are able to understand that we need multiple strong leaders, right? We need to kind of look and also build up those of us who are going to be leading this future fight. We need to have multiple people like us, because if we don't, all they have to do is eliminate the one or two people you have and your movement dies. And if you don't have leaders, it's also going to die because it's directionless. So you do need leaders. You just need more than one. The time is right for that. But in no way, shape, or form are these protests primarily violent. That is the wrong narrative. That, or in no way, shape, or form is the left. And by the way, by the left, I mean the like, I think people mean like Democrats and the entire left. First of all, the left isn't a monolith at all. So that's a mistake. But the people who are pro Black Lives Matter, people from the Black Lives Matter movement, are not the ones even doing the looting. They go home pretty early on. The looting starts later on at night. And I'm not necessarily against it if it's against big corporations. I am against it if it's against small businesses and mom and pop shops and restaurants and all that, because these people are, they're just like you and I. They're suffering against the same system of oppression. They may not realize it, but they are. And so I know that the majority of the people that are doing the looting in small businesses are doing it to blame the Black Lives Matter protesters, because that's what's been happening. But again, I go back to, why do we even have to do that? If you understand that we're fighting against the entire establishment and systemic oppression, looting is part of that. I can't tell people how to protest. I'm not going to tell people how to show their anger and outrage. It's not my place to do that. I think we can be more effective with our tactics if you are doing it for that reason. But to say that that's the majority is false. To say that looting is not a protest is false. It is a part of a protest. It's entirely part of our right to do so if we wanted to. Obviously, I would recommend doing it strategically, not necessarily the way it's being done. And that is like a revolution. I think America doesn't know what a revolution is if it hit him in the ass. I mean, look at what the Yellow Vest movement did. They were able to do that without any one solid person leading. And that's the thing. That's what we need to know and understand and be capable of doing. And America's just not there yet. We're slowly creeping up, but we're not there yet. We need to be unafraid. We need to come out in mass numbers, because the more people come out, the less likely they're going to be able to control. And we're showing politicians that we can show up. If we show up for this, we need to show them we can show up for everything else, for healthcare, for housing, for everything that we need as a people. We need to be able to do that. So support this cause, because this cause is going to trampoline us into the next big thing, which is the whole movement that encompasses all of it. The movement that Bernie Sanders, a lot of us wanted him to lead. Obviously, that's not the case anymore, and that's fine, because the whole point was not me, us. It was everybody else taking charge, and I think we've learned our lesson the hard way this time. One other thing I do want to mention is the fact that the establishment and a lot of the Democratic Party is trying to use this and co-opt it to say, oh, please vote. We have seen it in some protests. Oh yeah, vote. Remember to register and vote. They don't say particularly vote Biden. Sometimes they'll say vote Democrat, but most of the time they're inferring that you need to vote Democrat in order to get Donald Trump out. We need to realize that Donald Trump getting out of office and replacing him with Joe Biden or any other establishment Democrat is not going to solve the problem of police brutality. Number one, Joe Biden wrote the crime bill. He was part of the Obama administration as well after that, and Obama didn't do anything for Black people. Flint, Michigan still doesn't have clean water. He didn't do anything for Standing Rock. He actually pretty much let it happen up until the very end, just as like a goodbye, like, oh, make me look good kind of thing, where he actually said something, but he actually deported more people than Donald Trump has deported in terms of immigration. The idea that by voting Democrat, everything is gonna just be happy by getting rid of Trump. That's my worry with what's happening now, is like, we need to be vocal that that's not enough. And most people that I've talked to who are Black and who have been in these protests don't like Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, and they understand that Donald Trump isn't the answer, or that they aren't the answer, or that they're not going to automatically fix everything that's been going on. And let's not forget, Hillary Clinton was part of the horrible foreign policy that killed lots of brown children abroad. Nobody ever talks about that. But also her husband, Bill Clinton, during his presidency, made criminalization a huge part of his presidency. And Hillary Clinton, of course, is super predators. And so we need to be aware that this is not just a Democrat versus Republican thing. This is, again, the people being oppressed by the establishment, by the powers that be. If we don't do that, the message is going to get co-opted. This isn't a whole ploy to get Joe Biden to win, even though the forces are trying to make it that. We can't allow that to happen. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be supporting this movement who may not agree with that statement. And so we have to be aware that that's the reason we need to take this further and make sure people realize our fight is not against only racism, and it's not only against the right and the conservative wing. It's also against the Democratic establishment, who has kept us from electing progressives, who has kept us from nominating people like Bernie Sanders, who has cheated in their own elections, who engages in the same type of lies, except it's not outright, it's behind your backs, who hasn't done anything for working people for decades, who is the reason why we have Donald Trump today, their neoliberal policies. So again, we just need to make sure we're really leading with that. However, that doesn't mean that this movement isn't real and that everything that's been happening isn't valid. We need to make sure that our focus is on understanding what's actually happening, so we don't get lost into theories on what we think is happening. And then once we understand what's happening, we can go to the next level, which is where we all unite and fight against the oligarchy, which is what we need to do now more than ever. And I'm sick and tired of hearing people literally denounce this movement just because it's not the perfect thing that you wanted. It's not encompassing everything you wanted, and it's not encompassing everything I wanted either. But I think it's important because America needed to take a baby step because they don't understand all the nuances. And so in taking the step against police brutality, now we're going to be able to take the next step against war, against the mechanisms of the political manipulations, the corporations, against the wealth disparity, for healthcare, all of these things. In order to get there, we needed to do this. We were never just going to go from nothing to there. And so that is something that is a lesson. We have to deal with the present and then go from there. So thank you guys for watching. As always, find us here on YouTube, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, and ROKFIN. All right, guys, combo out.